Stress. Book, Robert Sapolsky, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. What stresses a zebra? Physical injury. Predators. Starvation. Stress, psychological and physiological response to a stimulus, stressor, that alters the body's equilibrium. Acute, instantaneous. Chronic, consistent and goes on. For animals, stress is acute, physical, responsive. For people, stress is chronic, psychosocial, anticipatory, dread. Neurobiology of dread in people. Burns. A bunch of subjects waiting to get electrical shock to the foot. At first you give them 100% of the voltage. Then, you ask them if they want to receive 90% voltage in 3 SECS, or 60% voltage in 27 SECS. The extreme dreader would prefer more voltage now than to wait for any shock later on. It's more painful to sit there and wait for something. The cingulate response to this. The more voltage you receive, the bigger the brain response. And extreme dreaders had earlier and more sustained activation before the shocks even occurred. Influenza 1918, killed more people than WWI. Hansel 1930s. He exposed rats to many stressors for months. He found peptic ulcers, ulcers in their eating system, enlarged adrenal glands, shrunken immune tissue. Autonomic nervous system. It divides into sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic. Brain to spine, organs, blood vessels, sweat glands, muscles, and hairs. It turns on for emergency, situation, arousal. 4FS. Releases epinephrine, adrenaline, /norepinephrine, noradrenaline. Parasympathetic. Sleep, eating, relaxation. Stress and hormones. Hypothalamus. Releases CRH, corticotropin releasing hormone, to the pituitary. Anterior pituitary. Releases adrenocorticotropic hormone, CTH, into blood. 15 seconds. Adrenal glands, kidney. Release glucocorticoids, steroids, cortisol. Few minutes. Hypothalamus-anterior pituitary-kidney. CRH-ACTH-cortisol. Stress response. Adaptive, when you're in danger, vs maladaptive, chronic. Mobilization of energy, myopathy, fatigue, diabetes. Increased cardiovascular tone, hypertension. Suppression of digestion, ulceration colitis. Suppression of growth, psychogenic dwarfism. Suppression of reproduction, amenorrhea, impotency, loss of libido. Suppression of immune system. Sharpening of cognition, neuron death. Ulcers, holes in the walls of the organ. Produces by a bacterium that causes gastritis that leads to ulcers. If you give them antibiotics, they improved a lot. Also, 15% of cases of ulcer don't have the bacterium. And this bacterium is incredibly widespread, but only 10% of the people who have the bacterium have ulcers. So maybe it's bacterium plus stress, which helped the bacterium to grow. Emotional neglect equals psychogenic dwarfism, the writer of Peter Pan had it. Type A personality. Friedman and Rosenman share history. They're immensely competitive, overachieving, time-pressured, impatient, hostile, increased risk PF cardiovascular disease like smoking or high cholesterol. That's why the chairs were being worn down, because people were so stressed every time. But in reality it failed to replication. The only things that was accurate was that they're hostile, and if they suppress the hostility, their risk for cardiovascular disorder goes up. Neurons in the hippocampal of healthy people have a lot of dendrites, and arborization. But neurons of stressed person are withered. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Anxiety disorder after exposure to a psychological trauma. They re-experience the original trauma through flashbacks and dreams. Increased arousal. Like assault/rape, combat, or any emotionally brutal experience. Persist in 20% of people. The number of active American soldiers who die from suicide is higher than the number who died from war. People who have smaller volumes of hippocampus are more vulnerable to PTSD. But other study found that the amygdala function predicts who's at higher risk for having PTSD. And the hippocampus changes over time due to stress. So, we don't really know the real cause and consequence. How to become resilient to stress. Outlets for frustration. Sense of predictability and control. Perception of life improving. Social support. Outlets for frustration, e.g. Rats receive mild shocks. Their heart rate goes up, glucocorticoid secretion up, ulcers. But if they can gnaw a wooden bar, or eat/drink, outlet, they get fewer ulcers. Or if they put other rats after the rats get the shock, the rat will bite the new rat, and will also get fewer ulcers. Baboons get healthier glucocorticoids levels, if after they lose a fight, they go beat up a lower-ranking baboon. Sense of control, e.g. if rats hear a warning before a shock. Even though they get an equal number of shocks, they have fewer ulcers. If you delivered food to a rat at intermittent intervals, their glucocorticoid levels go up. If a rat has a lever to avoid shocks, but still, they receive it, their stress response is reduced. If you make decision for yourself in your job, you're more resilient to stress, better attitude, more active, healthier, alert, etc. Individualist people, they do better if they pick their problems, 4 times better than the teacher picked them, and 2.5 better than when the mother picked. Collectivist people, they performed better if somebody they know, like their mother, picked their problems, 30% better than themselves, and 20% as well as the teacher. Rats in a jar. How long does rat swim before downing? 15 minutes to 60 hours. But why so much variance? If you only pick a random rat, and just throw it in the water, it will drown in around 15 minutes. But if you pick rats, let them wriggle free, you help them, you put them in and out of the water, they can swim for around 60 hours. Because they had hope that you will pick them out. If you have hope, you struggle for a long, long time. Social support. Primates after stress response. Among strangers, worse. Among friends, better. Measured by glucocorticoids. People. Public speaking, math task, etc. Less cardiovascular response if they're with a friend. People with spouses/close friends live longer. If the spouse dies, the risk of dying increases. If things are bad. But if you're improving, and you feel things are getting better, you become happier. Image 45:15. Emotional pain. Social or romantic rejection. Turns on the same pain system as physical damage. Pain. Sensory, objective. Affective, subjective. Somatosensory cortex equals response to physical pain. Anterior cingulate equals interprets that pain. E.g. people who are highly hypnotic, who will receive pain. They're told to imagine that the pain is higher or low, but in reality, it's always identical. The somatosensory cortex doesn't show difference. But anterior cingulate, big difference. E.g. to randomly assign people to 2000 mgs of a pain medication, Tylenol, Excedrin, for 3 weeks. Or they got placebo. By day 15 the reported less painful responses to social and romantic rejection. You will get ulcers if you take this type of medication, acetominofin. Stereotype threat. Others' judgments or one's own actions will confirm a negative stereotype about one's group. When it's invoked, people underperform. We all agree that racism is completely bad, and don't foster a stereotype. But in experiment after experiment in the USA, people on average are faster when they have to relate a list of unpleasant, black, 15 seconds, than unpleasant, white, 20 seconds. Also, if you show pictures of white or black people, the findings are the same. Faster white plus pleasant. Slower black plus pleasant. 75% of whites, and 50% of blacks. Web, implicit.harvard.edu/implicit, highly recommended. After this task. Because people had more knowledge about a stereotype, it influenced the performance on a demanding task, and they performed really bad. It doesn't matter if the subject was black or white. Everybody's falling victim on both sides. Stereotypes makes you stupider on performance in a cognitively demanding task.